It feeds more human beings than any other substance on earth. More than wheat. More than corn. More than all the meat of every animal combined. 3.5 billion people will eat it today. They will eat it in Tokyo skyscrapers, in Jakarta alleyways, in Lagos markets, in Houston suburbs, in prison cafeterias, in military mess halls, in refugee camps along the Thai border. It is the foundation of half the world's diet. It has launched wars, financed empires, and determined the fate of nations. And yet, the story of how this single grain came to dominate civilization is not a story of nourishment. It is not a story of harmony with the land. It is a story of empire, famine, engineered dependency, and the machinery of control. The grain that sustains life has a history written entirely in the language of power. This is the history of rice. The evidence begins in the Yangtze River Valley, approximately 9,000 years ago. Archaeological remains from the Himuda culture show deliberate cultivation. Not gathering. Not accidental foraging. Deliberate, systematic cultivation using bone spades and controlled flooding. Early farmers selected for larger grains, for stronger stalks, for plants that could survive the deliberate drowning and draining of fields. This was botany as engineering, millennia before the word existed. The grain spread south through the river systems, carried not by story, but by agricultural necessity. Where water could be controlled, rice could be grown. Where rice could be grown, populations exploded. And where populations exploded, states formed around the grain. By 200 BCE, the Qin and Han dynasties had transformed rice paddies into state infrastructure on a scale the ancient world had never seen. Dams stretching across valleys. Canals redirecting entire rivers. Terraced mountainsides carved by organized labor under imperial engineers. The grain became currency. Tax collectors measured wealth not in gold or silver, but in bushels stored in state granaries. Armies marched on rice rations measured to the ounce. Bureaucrats managed water distribution with the same precision they managed military logistics. Control the water. Control the harvest. Control the population. This formula would be repeated across Asia for the next 2 millennia, from the Khmer Empire to the Edo shogunate. The state and the grain became inseparable. The emperor who controlled the granary controlled the mandate. The grain crossed oceans on trading vessels and warships. Arab merchants carried it to the Swahili coast of East Africa. Portuguese navigators brought it to Brazil in the 16th century, forcing its cultivation on seized land using imported labor. Spanish colonizers imposed it in the Philippines, dismantling existing agricultural systems to create export-oriented paddies. Dutch administrators in Java measured every hectare for rice tribute. British surveyors in Burma mapped the Irrawaddy Delta for rice export to Europe. Everywhere it traveled, it followed the same pattern. Indigenous populations were displaced. Labor was extracted through forced system. The grain that fed empires was built, consistently and predictably, on the erasure of those who first understood the water. But the most brutal chapter begins in the Bengal Delta. In 1757, the British East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal at the Battle of Plassey. Robert Clive and the company did not merely take territory. They took the rice economy entire. Under the Permanent Settlement of 1793, Lord Cornwallis fixed land taxes in cash, regardless of harvest conditions or flood damage. Peasants who could not pay had their land auctioned to speculators and moneylenders. Tax collectors demanded payment in grain when cash failed. The company exported rice to feed British soldiers in Madras and Ceylon while local populations faced shortages. The famine of 1770 killed 10 million. This was not mismanagement. This was extraction by design. The colony existed to move grain out. The people who grew it were accounted as labor inputs, not as populations to be sustained. The extraction reached its absolute apex in 1943. British administrators, under Winston Churchill, diverted grain from Bengal to feed European war efforts and to build British stockpiles against potential Japanese invasion. Rice imports from Burma were blocked by Japanese occupation. Local reserves were seized by military procurement officers. The price of rice in Calcutta markets multiplied by 10 in a matter of months. 3 million people died. Not from plague. Not from drought. Not from natural disaster. From administrative policy. Churchill dismissed the catastrophe in private memoranda. The fault, he claimed, lay with the population itself for reproducing beyond carrying capacity. The grain that had built the British Empire had become, in the hands of its administrators, a weapon of mass destruction. Ships loaded with Australian wheat passed Indian ports while bodies piled in the streets and dogs ate the dead. The post-war era promised a different future, wrapped in the language of science and humanitarian rescue. In 1966, the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines released IR-8. Nicknamed Miracle Rice, the new strain produced 10 times the yield of traditional varieties under optimal conditions. Norman Borlaug and his contemporaries believed they were ending hunger through chemistry and genetics. But the miracle came with conditions that were economic, not merely agricultural. The new rice demanded synthetic fertilizers, petrochemical pesticides, controlled irrigation systems beyond the means of smallholders. Farmers who adopted it found themselves locked into debt cycles, buying input season after season from the same corporations that sold them the seeds. The Green Revolution did not liberate the peasant. It industrialized him, transformed him from a seed-saving cultivator into a dependent purchaser of proprietary inputs. The laboratory became the new colonial office. The corporate consolidation followed swiftly and relentlessly. Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta. Patents were filed on seed varieties that farmers had developed over centuries through selective breeding. A farmer in India who saved seeds from his own harvest could be sued for intellectual property theft. The logic was inverted entirely. The corporation owned the genetic code. The farmer merely rented the right to grow it. Terminator technology was developed to produce sterile seeds, forcing annual repurchase. The World Trade Agreement on Agriculture forced open markets to subsidized foreign grain, bankrupting local growers. Rice, once the foundation of self-sufficient agricultural civilization, became a subscription service. The boardroom had accomplished what the colonial office had only attempted: total control of the grain from laboratory to table. Today, the grain faces a crisis that no laboratory can patent away. Rice paddies consume 40% of all global irrigation water. Aquifers beneath the Punjab and the North China Plain are collapsing at rates that exceed natural recharge by threefold. Rising sea levels threaten the Mekong Delta and the Ganges-Brahmaputra Basin, where a fifth of the world's rice is grown. Saltwater intrusion renders paddies barren before the maps are redrawn. The same grain that allowed human populations to multiply across Asia now stands at the edge of a climate threshold. The water is running out. The land is sinking. The system is approaching its physical limit. 3.5 billion people will eat rice today. Most will not know that their bowl carries the weight of 9,000 years of hydraulic engineering, imperial taxation, colonial extraction, and corporate enclosure. They will not know that the grain in their hands once fed armies, financed empires, starved nations, and locked farmers into debt. They will eat. And the machinery that moves the grain from the paddy to the plate will continue, unseen, efficient, and absolute, until the water runs dry.